live centers.
The light doesn't go up there.
Okay, we're live. Welcome back. For those in the public, I've asked Tucker to come in because we've had testimony on sports betting twice from Tucker and a couple of other witnesses, I think at least one other witness, and we haven't gotten anywhere near as far as I would have hoped. We're still waiting on Tucker's report, but I do want to keep a placeholder in this bill to keep the discussion alive. And I thought the easiest way was to set up a task force similar to the one we set up 2 years ago that passed the Senate and just change the dates on the thing. And this way it'll give us something to discuss with the House, and we may even, go with that eventually as a way to do it, combine the legislative task force with this extensive study and build some enthusiasm for an idea that is apparently enthusiastic and received all over the country. And we're missing out on some of the revenues. So Tucker, can you walk us through, was it S79?
S59.
59 from, I don't know if it's in the latest draft of the rules.
So we're doing 59 and 159.
It's true, yeah.
There's a certain
100 years. I don't know if you have it in a place where you might be able to share it on your screen.
I'll send it to Scott immediately. I did incorporate it into the draft that you've all been working on.
Oh, really?
The David Hall and Damian Leonard's bill that you've been working on, I can't quite.
Yeah, if you incorporated it, I don't think we've seen, this version is fine.
Is it 3.1?
And I think that's because there were 3 attorneys in the same document, and I didn't know when it was being updated by others.
So it's in here? Okay.
Hold on.
Okay, let's check.
I
Do
looked,
my quick
I
through.
looked at the end because I figured that's where you put it, but I didn't see it there.
So it's H1.
This is date 5/25. Yes.
Just sent it over to Scott, and when he pulls it up, this is going to be the new sections 16 and 17 of the bill. I incorporated them in and then updated the effective date section to be section 19, renumbered accordingly.
Okay.
S59 from 2020 had 2 sections. First, a findings section that explained some of the details around sports betting markets nationwide and the potential advantages to Vermont and the need for some investigation around what the benefits could be to the state and an in-depth examination of what some of the options are. Scott, it's going to be on page 62. Is going to be the start under the reader assistance heading sports betting study committee.
Great. Thank you. Good to see you out there.
Yeah, it's not in here.
So in section 16 in the findings, these have been updated since 2020. In 2020, there were 15 states that had enacted some form of sports betting market, either through tribal compact agreements, state law, or through the amendment of the state constitution.
Okay, they were just getting to it now. Okay.
So, sorry, I hate to ask this obvious question, but this is a different draft than 3.1, right?
Yeah.
Because, okay.
Yes, but I did not know that when I worked on this, so my apologies.
So this is the latest draft up here, but this bill here that you have in front of you is the bill. There's just these new sections on sports betting that have been added to it. That's all.
Correct.
It's the only change. You're not going to find it in papers.
So they're added to the end of the bill, or
Correct, because we just ended.
yeah, because the effective
Yeah.
date is 16. Okay, now I understand what's happening.
Thank you.
So to give you an update on what's happened in the findings section here since 2020, in general, the percentage of adults that are sports wagering has stayed somewhat the same. There's an estimate that there's been about a 5 to 12% increase, particularly around betting around the NFL. That's where there's been an exponential increase in sports wagering. The new statistic that we have based on a bunch of surveys that have been done, particularly by Nielsen, is that the number of people who say that they are interested in sports betting in some way has risen to just short of 50% of the adult population in the US. So that has been added to the findings here.
Okay.
The next addition was that in subdivision 3 in S59, it identified 15 states and that have enacted some form of sports wagering market. That has increased to 31 states and the District of Columbia. There were even more states, but the markets were found to be out of sync with federal law and were struck down by the courts. So now you have 31 states, DC, and there are an additional 3 states that have enacted laws or adopted ballot measures to permit legal sports wagering, among them through Louisiana and Ohio.
So we're really becoming an outlier.
So within this context, you essentially have 35 territories in the US that have some form of legalized sports wagering.
Can I interrupt you? This finding above that, does that change from S59? And is that too difficult to change at this point? Or you don't want it, you don't think it's worthy of, you don't have enough information to change that this way?
So we don't have enough information to change that. To some extent, it has stayed around the same numbers. I can pull different estimates from the revenue portion of the study that's finished and put them in, and that would not be a big hassle. I would just need to know.
Well, I would only ask you to do that if it would change the range by much.
Okay.
If it's right around that range, we'll just leave it there. When Senator Sears, I know, said he thought it was going to raise 50.
Interest in Vermont in the population has stayed somewhat static, but the revenue estimates have changed based on the different models of taxation and revenue share agreements that states have been adopting. And if you were to look, for example, at New York far exceeded what they thought the revenue estimates were going to be because of.
So I would ask, this will be a finding that will be of interest to the Senate.
Okay.
If your report is somewhat done in this regard, and you're telling us that you can have a different range, a wider range, put it in.
Okay, I will put that in. Next finding, legislation has also been introduced in at least 14 of the states without a legal sports betting market, including Vermont. There have been 2 proposals in the last 2 biennia to legalize, regulate, and tax sports betting. So you essentially have only 4 states without a legal sports betting market or without some proposal on the table.
Wow, that is so altered in 2 years.
Yes,
It's incredible.
the market expansion has been.
Well, that's why I think at the very least the House will entertain a study. I mean, before
This time.
the whole idea was so far.
The states that have not put something on the table are Wisconsin, Alaska, Utah, and Idaho.
How interesting. I would not have guessed that those were the 4 states.
The study committee is unchanged from a few years ago, except for the dates that the report will be due. The membership is the Attorney General, Commissioner of Liquor and Lottery, Commissioner of Taxes, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Commerce and Community Development, 2 members of the Senate, 2 members of the House. The AG, Commissioner of Liquor and Lottery, Commissioner of Taxes, those are all direct interests in the market. The Secretary of State is currently the registering entity for daily fantasy sports as it was legalized 5 or 6 years ago in Vermont. So that's the entity that registers those.
Oh, right. Yeah, of course.
The committee is charged with studying various models for legalizing, taxing, and regulating sports betting, including examining the studies carried out by other states, laws enacted by other states, potential models for legalizing and regulating sports betting.
Sorry, just to go up, where is your study figuring here? Because you will have done the most in-depth work on this so are we actually, I mean, it's great to look at other states, but I would like them to really focus on the huge amount of work you've done.
The study that JFO and Ledge Council have done has each one of these components.
Right, I appreciate that, but are we not calling it out for them
So
to?
it's a good idea, we should probably add
See
that.
if they should look at it.
Yeah,
My God, they
it's
should-
bad. I mean, I was just trying to replicate the 2 years ago, so we could just
Yeah,
say,
but
sell through, but we could add
I
definitely.
think one of the things, I mean, we have moved the ball here, and Tucker has helped move the ball, and so have, of course, the 2 years, intervening 2 years, where so many other states have moved in this direction. So I would really like us to reference and anchor some of their consideration in the work that's been done, and they call out your work.
I will do that. The last few pieces evaluate the models broadly that could be used. And again, the one distinction between what this study committee can do and what the legislative offices are permitted to do is that you can actually make policy decisions that will then impact, for example, the revenue models that we can show you.
Right.
So decisions that are made upstream, we can then give you very detailed information on what the impacts of the state would be based on the research that we've done.
Yes. Right, because they all have, because we're a control state. I mean, there are different models available to us as a control state than there would be for New York or Massachusetts.
If we jump back to the discussion we had 5 or 6 weeks ago when I did that 30-minute overview of the study.
Right.
Vermont is wide open.
Yeah.
The decisions that were made in other states were impacted by the existence of tribal governments, impacted by a history of organized crime, that's the New Jersey model, or you had states where sports betting had been legalized by this point almost 100 years, and that's Nevada. So Vermont has essentially a blank sheet to do whatever you would like with this market, and you're not cornered really by any history of relationship with this market, by any existing legal barriers. So once you've chosen which model you want to go with, there you can make a number of pinpoint policy decisions. They have impacts throughout enforcement, revenue, everything.
But this study committee is charged with reviewing all the various models, because there's been some concern that because the administration may have control over this committee, that they have already decided on the model they want, but this is not a formal
Right.
comment.
Now, in the first decision, and again, this was in the overview 5 weeks ago, the first decision is whether or not you even want to use a control model for this particular market.
Oh, that's a big decision.
That's the first decision that has to be made, because that's the primary distinction between the minority of states and the majority of states that have established a licensure structure. And that's where you get into the far more rigorous and detailed discussion around policy that should be implemented in statute versus administrative rule.
Okay, anything else?
So, After pauses, I just see what the charge is, other than reviewing all the models, the fabulous Tucker Anderson study, and the, what are the final recommendations? I'm not, are they going to recommend to the legislature a model or options?
See what it says.
Yeah, I don't see what it says.
I
That's why.
didn't want to change it much, but it might be worthwhile to say they should produce a legislative recommendation for legislation.
Yeah, I
We
think that moves it.
want to move with the study that Tucker's done and with this committee meeting. I don't know how many times we should be able to be all set to go.
So I'd appreciate it if one of the charges was actually to charge a recommended model for moving forward. And the committee, as they take it up, will obviously look at some of the other options they discussed in the course of the presentation of the task force's work, but I think they should make a recommendation, because
Okay, so with its findings and any recommendation, maybe we should say and a recommendation or and recommendations for legislature.
great,
Not
let's get rid of
any,
We will strike any
strike any
charges there.
and all.
That's the report.
How many meetings did we set? I mean, this could be a subject of the conference too, in terms of, I'm sure we've had it a little bit, but
We don't,
did it say how many meetings?
Let me check subsection G. It does not call out a limitation on the payment. There's a time limit from September 1st to December 15th. And it's worth noting that each one of the members of
Not
the
more than
committee.
4 meetings.
Okay,
Sorry, it says online,
there you go, 20.
whatever. We
I'm
have
highlighting it on my computer as if it's gonna happen on the screen behind me, sorry.
Okay, that's good. We could discuss. further.
Clarity, who physically is gonna do the work? I know you have a committee and so on, but who's actually gonna do the work?
Well, thankfully, the report
The work has
is,
been done as far as I'm concerned, but there's a lot of other stuff in there.
Well, the task force.
Ledge Council and JFO is assigned to provide the technical
Okay, that's what I
assistance.
want to clarify.
And typically with these legislator-led committees, as I know you've experienced in the past, that means the preparation of whatever the final legislation is and any, JFO assistance you need to evaluate the revenue models.
I just wanted clarity.
We all want clarity.
We all want clarity.
I need clarity in like 2 days with no phone calls or emails. Each week. Because you want 9 days a week, but 2 of them with no electronic devices working.
Okay, thank you very much, Tucker.
Tucker, that's
Can you-
terrific.
There are a couple of changes, right? Could you
Yeah.
get them to the collective group and to put it into the latest draft?
I will put them together and make sure that the Honorable Damian Leonard and David Hall know what the changes are. Thank you all.
Thank you.
They are, so.
Okay,
we are.
Let's move on to issues that I flagged. Let's talk about the paid leave task force. Now,
Oh, yes, we have Jordan and
we have
Morgan here.
So the questions that I thought remained,
So what page? Let's get ourselves on
good idea.
the page, and I believe it is on our previous draft of 1.2, because it was on page 51.
No longer than 50 pages ought to have a table of contents.
I agree with you completely. I think the journal ought to have a table of contents.
What page again? 51?
Okay, it's 14C,
Thank you.
and so it is now on page, it's been drafted on page 50. Oh, good, it's drafted.
Sorry about my
So,
garbage.
yeah.
So as I wrote the committee, 2 issues that I thought were resolved yesterday was the issue of whether the task force should only be reviewing universal options or proven options. I think the consensus was that it should not be restricted to that.
Yeah, so if you look at the new language here,
Yeah, because that's what we have.
pull that up on the screen.
We have new language.
So it would be
Yeah.
develop an understanding of best practices and implementation possibilities for the potential enactment of an equitable and affordable paid family and medical leave insurance program in Vermont, including both universal and voluntary program models for such program. I apologize for the repetition of program. I think we could just say voluntary models for such a program, but if anyone dislikes the repetition of program, I'm happy to change it to just models for such a program.
I think that's fine.
All right,
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, you've
Yeah.
got 3 programs in one sentence.
yep, at least. There's more than that, actually. It's a long sentence.
It is a lot.
Nathaniel Hawthorne-esque.
Or an Irish.
So this is a small thing, and I hate to prolong the conversation, but it might be the case that the committee, for whatever reason, doesn't want to review the voluntary program. In this case, they're mandated to. I would leave it more open-ended.
We had said, I thought we had language like yesterday, that said they would, they could review, including that they could review.
So we could say, which may include
Yes.
both universal and voluntary models. models for such a program.
I mean, if the governor doesn't go forward with this program, and there's no interest in doing a voluntary program, why do we want this task force to
Right,
spend
I
their
would
time
agree.
looking at a
So let's
voluntary?
say we
Say there's no interest in the voluntary program.
I mean, like, there's nobody pushing for it, like the governor, or nobody on the task force is interested in doing it. Why should they be spent if they're all there, you know, the way this is written, it seems like you gotta like do a deep dive into a voluntary
I
program. That the commission itself, I'm not saying, I don't wanna restrict them from not doing it, but I don't wanna force them to do any one thing. It could be the same thing for a universal model, possibly.
Right.
Well, I guess the one thing that I would think about is if there is a possibility of a voluntary model that actually makes sense, that works, and so on, I don't want to, even by implication, almost preclude it being done based on the assumption that this is going to be, because everybody, quote unquote, is in favor of the universal model.
No, I'm not trying to exclude the voluntary model at all, I'm just trying to make it that a voluntary model or a universal model doesn't have to be that. Is there a way you could see writing this?
Yeah, you just suggested it, I think.
Yeah, so what I'm proposing is to say, it's strike including and replace that with which may include.
Yeah.
And that's permissive with the
Or even say-
suggestion. Or,
Yeah, that sounds good.
you know, you could also just put a period there.
You could just say models, which may include both universal and voluntary models, period. And get rid of program for such a program.
It's not a big deal, I'm sorry, I raised it, but Senator Brock, if you feel strongly about it.
Well, I
I'm-
clearly want to see the options explored.
Yeah, that's it.
Because I think it's important, because you will always be left, if you go solely with the universal program, that that's what you had in mind to begin with, and that where folks who are proponents of
Yeah, and
that model, proponents of the universal model, universally say that it is impossible to get a voluntary model that is cost effective.
And I was in that camp at one point, and then I said, maybe we could build on the governor's model. You know, so I'm not averse to looking at it, but I was trying to come up with language
Yeah.
that if it was unnecessary to look at it, because
Right.
nobody had an interest
So
in
we
it,
don't,
why force them to do that?
right,
So, but
we don't know where we're gonna be in those in a few
maybe
months, so,
the word explore is a possibility as opposed to, you know,
which may
a fully
include.
vetting of, you know, it'll work out in the community regardless, but,
I think Damien's language is good, which may include both universal and voluntary models.
okay, good. You got a
Okay.
motion on that? Okay.
And that gets rid of your two programs in one
It
sentence.
does,
Hey, we should team up more often.
we should. This is a good editing process. Hemingway-esque. Trimming it down to the bare minimum. I don't know why I'm doing the literary.
Joy,
Yeah, but it's
Joy,
fun.
Okay,
if it was Joyce, the whole bill would be one sentence.
I'll leave this to you, Senator Clarkson, but I think we have worked with some of the stakeholders who wanted to be part of the task force as
Correct.
opposed to be consulted. And I wrote to you guys last night, I said, I've had direct experience with both models, and the pure legislative one works far better than having a community of 12 with stakeholders there that are really hard to identify.
Right.
I did that with unemployment insurance. It was a nightmare 10, 12 years ago. But we
Is
did
there
that.
language in about consulting? with
No,
these?
we want the
We-
language
I
about
want
consulting.
I would love to have language, Damien, maybe you've already put it in the new thing about,
I
I'd like to
haven't, since
consult with.
I drafted this before those emails
Okay,
were exchanged.
so key would be two things. One is the federal program, if the federal program is
That language
enacted.
isn't.
You've got that, I believe.
Yep.
Okay, and the
So-
second, so we talked about that yesterday. The second is I love language that includes, this work will be done in consultation with with,
I would say,
The
including
stakeholders.
stakeholders, in fact, the stakeholders, however you write it, including the following, so it doesn't limit it to just
correct.
those particular groups.
Yes,
Okay.
that's,
Highlights
I
that.
counted that part, yeah.
Those particular groups have to be.
And I have a list of those which we could but if you give me 1 sec, I can pull them up.
You have already sent it to me, so I've got it.
But we would like to hear it too.
Yeah, so-
Yes.
Exactly.
Oh, well, then I'll let you pull it up, Senator.
Well, you may have it already in front of you.
I can pull it up too. Let me stop
Okay.
the share
Let's see,
here.
you're probably
So-
faster than I am. I'm pretty slow, but,
Let's see. Depends.
okay, I got it.
See, you beat me to it.
It's not a competition, although it was sort of. Okay. Oh, whoops. Let me go first one. Here it is. Okay, so we have, they had identified quite a few, and I'll just read the list and we can figure out which ones.
We're down to 5.
Well, that was where I'd hoped to be. But the Vermont Commission on Women, the disability community, the LGBTQ, the Main Street, the business community, labor, early childhood providers, public health provider, Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, and education. So Voices for Vermont Children, BIPOC. So I think I had asked us to get down to 5 of these. I would definitely call out the business community, both with the BBSR and Main Street. And maybe we just say the business community. I don't know how, I mean, it's hard. There are many business
Did you
groups.
consider not naming specific groups? Say
Exactly.
representatives of labor,
Labor, business,
small business, nonprofits.
well, they are businesses.
And then, I mean, the basic direction to the committee is to hear from everybody.
Right.
What page?
Yeah,
Are on page 51 at the moment, but this is not, this list was sent in an early draft. And the question is, I would say that including but not limited to the business community, the business, labor, education, what else, communities? I mean, if you can figure out a way, Damien, to kind of group some of these together, that would be great.
I mean, typically we typically don't call out specific interest groups when we're
Right.
saying consult with for a study. So, because, I mean, part of it there is the question then becomes like, do those interest groups have a specific role or, additional influence? So typically what we'll do is we'll group them. And I know that this is already structured with, a grouping of nonprofits and small businesses and representatives of labor and so forth. And so what I'll do is I'll say, shall consult with stakeholders and representatives of the following groups.
That's good.
And then it's left to the committee members.
And the advocates to
Right,
clarify that they want to be heard.
The committee members who will hear from advocates and then be able to reach out to other advocates and say, do you want to be heard on this issue? And then that's typically the process when you get to the summer study committee is, you have your first organizational meeting, and then part of that meeting is discussing, okay, who are we inviting to speak at the next meeting? And let's do a press release asking for, people to submit written testimony or something like that, depending on the study committee and how they want to approach it. That first meeting, you sort of just decide how you're going to tackle that. And maybe it is that you're hearing from, these 3 stakeholder groups at meeting 2 and these 4 stakeholder groups at meeting 3 and so forth. Or maybe you're just inviting everyone to speak and then you're calling people back if you have additional questions. And so it really depends on how that committee decides to run it.
So let me just take a break. We have 2 people in the room. 1 minute if you want to comment on this at all. Is that a good direction for you? I saw you nodding your head. Does that work?
Good morning. Thank you, Morgan Nichols, Main Street Alliance. For the record, I've just sent you an email. From our perspective, I think if we appreciate that you want to put in statute that you will consult with these groups. I've just sent kind of our preference list for, the top 5, which would be gender equity, which would include commission, business, labor, the BIPOC community, and children and families. We feel that those would be the top 5 groups within the stakeholder community. And of course, there are so many more that we would want to include as well. And
Well,
maybe we could put language in that says not limited to.
Well, that's standard what, over the years,
Of course.
included has been interpreted as not limited to the legislative.
Yeah,
We really
actually-
appreciate your willingness.
Part of
to
our
work with
ledge council.
It's part of statute, actually.
Yeah,
That
I
anytime you
changed
see
it.
the word including in the Vermont statutes, it means including but not limited to.
I'm forwarding this to you, Damien.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, so we've resolved everything on the task force, I think.
Okay, what we
so-
haven't resolved are number of meetings.
Yeah.
Do we have number of meetings in there?
We do, so the federal language is here. So just so I make sure I've touched on it, considerations related to the potential enactment of a federal paid family and medical leave insurance program, including any measures that may be necessary to ensure that a potential state program could adapt to and complement the coverage provided by the federal program rather than having them be in conflict. So,
I'm trying to find you. Got it.
yes, I'm sorry, that is page 52, line 18 to 21.
Right?
So,
Yes,
you were asking about meetings and compensation. So, members,
No, I'm not asking about compensation. I know what that is.
yeah, no, but they're entitled to compensation for not more than 6 meetings.
Oh, is that where it's under?
Yep, it's on page 54 at the very top, line 2.
Yes, this is a big task. Okay.
So it's 6 meetings. The appropriations question is there because right now, this includes provision for modeling and actuarial projections.
Right.
So that would be more than the typical amount for a study committee. Should say to the General Assembly. So that's a typo that I will correct. But
We're editing it together.
one of the questions is whether you want to include that funding for actuarial projections and so forth. And then I'll
But
be
is-
completely honest, I have no idea what the appropriate amount would be for that. I would defer to JFO.
Isn't that just part of the elasticity of the JFO budget with some of these?
I would defer to JFO for that. I mean, I think if you're expecting a big contract, you need to make sure the funds are there.
I'm gonna email Catherine right now and just ask her.
I would prefer to put some money, it's Joyce, I would prefer to put some
Choice is there.
money, because we've discovered that we may have more money to deal with because of, I don't know if you heard the discussion in the projections.
For wage replacement.
Replacement, Joyce did not realize it went down to 67%.
Oh, okay. Great.
Joyce is right behind you. She's got your back.
Yeah, so
Okay.
I might suggest putting in a placeholder of maybe 200,000, and I can check with Chris Roop in our office. He's been involved in the actuarial projections for the pensions work group. And I think he might have some better idea of how much actuaries charge.
Yeah, I was saying we have 5 more minutes to reach out to Mike Pichek. He may have some numbers, but that would just be for state employees. And that might be a very smaller, easier group to project on, so.
Chris is he did such an excellent job on
You
pensions.
could maybe get a number, maybe we'll put 200,000, but if you can get a more refined number, that would be great choice.
Okay.
I think that's it for that. What I'd like to do next is the film commission and then take a little break and then we'll start dealing with some money issues because I think we've dealt with all the remaining substantive issues.
Okay. There is the question of how much to appropriate for the COVID sick leave program. Do you just want me to put in the amount from
No,
Joyce's
that's
projection?
what we're gonna talk about after the break.
Ah,
Joyce is redoing it at 67%, so we have a better.
great. Okay, and I'm available till 11, and then I'm scheduled somewhere else at 11. So
Okay, so let's see if we can knock off the film commission quickly, and then we'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll.
Okay, that is on.
Joyce, you can come back, I'd say, 20 to 11, and we could talk about where we are with the Senate and what the governor recommended and what we give it a target by the appropriation.
okay,
Yes.
and I'll see you on Zoom.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you.
So the film commission, the conversation we had is not necessarily,
Let's find
again,
it first.
again, what was in the bill yesterday was just a
Study.
it was just a study, but it wasn't decided yet. And we had a conversation about it, and Senator Rock pushed hard for retaining the commission, and I said, well, maybe a simpler thing would be make it advisory to the department on film, on this receptor.
Yeah,
As I think people know, and I'm learning, I'm not really close to this issue. It's pretty much of a hot potato when you talk about the film commission. If we did pass those commissions, we would be the one going to appropriation. Sell it. But
well, let me just find it.
but I think that if you take the word commission out, you pretty much accomplish the same thing. I know you have some tweaks in the language you might want to see, and that may be an easier sell, because your language as a commission really didn't have any money in it, just.
And the money would obviously have to be added. So, and going back, as I mentioned, you and I had a conversation briefly last night, and I got the sense that, the majority of the committee is in favor of the study idea. And so it's not like canceling the witness. There's no point bringing people in and waste time.
Well, that was a miscommunication, but.
So in any case, I think the notion of creating a study committee of some kind is probably the right answer. The only question is this something that's left to the department, or do we do some form of study committee, as we've done with a number of other things, so that we ensure that we get a balance of interests involved in
So you want,
determining whether this does or does not make
so
sense.
you want to work with the study rather than your
Yes.
language and change the commission to an advisory council.
That's my inclination right now as a starting point.
Okay,
But part of the starting point is whether or not you do in fact reinstitute the commission going forward, and that you have a time-defined study. And then the question would be, if you do a study, there are three ways that I could see to do the study. One is, as you've got here, to charge ACCD with doing the study,
And JFO.
and JFO. I do have some concern about JFO, quite frankly. JFO has not, in my judgment, proven to be good at projecting forward on things that deal with revenue, and reasonable projection of revenue of things that don't exist right now. They're good at looking back at what's been spent and what's been done. But if we look at JFO in terms of everything from the military retirement pay issue to just looking at TIFs, I have some concerns.
The only thing, and I don't disagree, I think if you're willing to keep it a study, we could make it a separate group. But I do think in this case, they do have data from before, so they could update
They have
those
some
numbers.
data from before, but again, the question overall is, did the commission, as it was constituted before, do the things and do them in the way that a study group would say, this is the way to do it? Because one of the things you have to do is look at the fact that most of the states do in fact have film commissions, and examine how they're working and examine what's working, not base it on what we did 10 years ago that didn't work.
Right, but it did work initially, so that the initial stuff was great when Mistress Turgeon was the executive director. I would then suggest, I mean, just in terms of whether we want to do it with legislators or not, that actually the key group that isn't here is the Vermont Arts Council, who basically
Right.
oversees.
And I know
that now.
I've spoken with
Karen.
I've spoken with Karen at length on this.
I would suggest that we consider charging them with doing this work in conjunction with maybe JFO and ACCD, because they had helped house it. I mean, there's a history there too. And JFO would then help run the numbers for them. We obviously look at those numbers too, and maybe put 2 legislators on as well. But I would
Do we
give,
have,
or the Arts
I'll
Council.
defer to you guys on this, and I know Becca's very interested in this too. You know, can we just mandate that the Arts Council and ACCD come back with a report and have the resources of JFO at their disposal? JFO's not necessarily contributing to the report as a policy area, but these 2 groups, I mean, I want to look at this as an economic development
Yeah,
issue.
It is an
Yeah.
economic development issue, and my inclination is to have legislative involvement, because legislators are the ones who've got to live with the policy and write it.
So, and maybe Arts Council, ACCD with 2 legislators?
If possible.
Yeah.
Possible.
We need David, but we can give this to David.
Is that David, is it David's section?
Yeah.
Okay.
David drafted the initial one, I think. But that, I think that would be good.
Yeah, the big thing is to reach out to all forms of this industry and get the input in addition to examining what's being done elsewhere that in fact
Right.
works, particularly for small states that don't have a lot of money. And there's a lot of interviewing that in fact is a problem.
Right.
The question then becomes, who is going to be able to do it, who's got the time to do it, whether or not, you know, there's any resource issue. You don't want to spend a ton of money on this, but you do have to put the same kind of language, I think, that we put in to all of these other studies, just to cover the per diem and so on and so forth, and then determine, you know, between the Arts Council, you're taking ACCD out of it at this point? I wouldn't take them out of it.
I'd include them.
I would
I'd give
include them because of the role that,
I would almost call it a working group of 2 legislators, a representative of ACD and one from the Arts Council. Those people, small group, let them work, let them have the resources, ACCD behind them to give them. I don't think we need a separate appropriation to ACCD because they have a big enough
I'd have
budget.
to ask ACCD that.
But if we give the Arts Council the charge, they right now sort of oversee the film business here, and as does a little bit of tourism. I'm sure if a film was made here, they would work with ACCD and the Arts Council. So it might be great to give the Arts Council the charge of leading it and convening us and being.
As I say, I don't have any experience with the Arts Council, and so as a result, what I don't know is their ability to lead an economic development effort. That's what I don't know.
They were great partners, remember, on the COVID relief work. They were one of our key partners, and they are experienced, and they do a ton of economic work. The creative sector, remember, is one of our big economic sectors. So I think the Arts Council is more than capable of being charged with that and convening it. We have to ask her.
Who were you talking about the ACCD?
It has been tourism.
At ACCD, tourism.
And economic development.
It's prior to Elaine Haney leaving there and going over to Emerge.
Yeah.
She had done some work. Yeah, prior to that, I met with her a couple times while she was still there. So I might reach out to her to see.
Okay, I'm gonna reach, with your permission, I'm gonna reach out to Karen and see if they'd be interested in being charged with this.
Yeah, I had a lengthy conversation with her.
So good.
So
Just
She's
2 days ago.
Scott's reaching out to David Paul, will get him in to just hear the thinking and see if he can quickly draft up some language for our review. So let's take a 10-minute break. We'll try and finish up this bill.